Welcome to Atheist Talk, produced by Minnesota Atheists. Minnesota Atheists practices positive, friendly neighborhood atheism in order to provide a community for atheists, to educate the public about atheism, and to promote separation of state and church. We offer free literature and speakers about atheism to the public, as well as a free sample newsletter to anyone interested. Our contact information will appear during and at the end of this program, and we hope that if you like what you see, you'll consider becoming a member of Minnesota Atheists. If you're interested in us, we're interested in you. The topic for today's program is alternative scriptures, and with us is author and educator Dale McGowan. Welcome, Dale.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Okay. Well, Dale, what are alternative scriptures?
When I'm using the term alternative scriptures, it should be pointed out that I'm talking about alternatives within the Judeo-Christian system, not Hindu scriptures or something like that, but other scriptures than those that are considered canonical. Canonical scriptures Bible. Are the ones that are in the Bible, right? The 66 books that were actually included in the Bible. So alternative scriptures are other sacred texts that, for one reason or another, were not included in what ultimately became the canon of the Bible.
Yeah, I think some people have this idea that the Bible just gathered everything that was out there at the time.
Right. Either that it gathered everything or that it was the one authentic set that was somehow directly associated with the apostles, is the idea, or in the generation shortly thereafter, shortly after the life of Jesus, and that what we then have is an either-or choice. We accept what they wrote as an actual description of what happened and an actual valid set of sacred texts, or we reject them. But it's actually a much more complex mix than that.
Okay. And so there were other scriptures and gospels that didn't make it into the Bible.
Yes, quite a few, quite a lot. And we could go to, I could talk about Old Testament scriptures as well. There's a tremendous amount of, if I can pronounce the word correctly, I'm going to be using this reference quite a bit, Jewish pseudepigrapha is the word, and I'll spell that for you now. No, I won't. It's a collection of works similar to the idea of things not included in the Christian Bible. These are Jewish scriptures that were not included in the Torah and in other Jewish sacred writings that are describing a lot of the same events that are described in the Old Testament, describing the creation of the world, describing the flood, and so on, but either different retellings of the same story or sometimes completely different stories. And at one time or another, largely for political reasons, what was the scripture that was needed at a particular time to reinforce the faithful, to secure particular political advantage at the time? Scriptures were selected for those reasons. And of course, it was always said that they were selected because God inspired the writers or God inspired the selectors, and that's something that people are going to have to decide on their own. But there's tremendous evidence in the Old Testament of political considerations influencing the writings, and also of writings not taking place during the time that they were claimed. The Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, were always said to be the work of Moses. Moses actually wrote the first 5 books. That's problematic for several reasons, including the fact that he describes his own death and burial. But there's another, at the end of the 5th book, right, and then I died. There's another problem. There's a much more significant historical problem that actually took the Pentateuch out of the area of 2000 BCE, which is when it was typically placed around 2100 years before the alleged birth of Christ, and puts it 1,000 years later, which is quite a difference in history. One of the examples is the reference to Abraham coming out of Ur of the Chaldees. This is the description of the city of Ur, and he had come out of Ur of the Chaldees. This is on the when he's leading he's about to lead the Israelites to the Promised Land, to Canaan. The problem is the Chaldees are a people who did not occupy Ur and actually were not present in that land until around the year 1100. They actually supposedly were in the area and not even in the city until 800. But if we grant 1100, then the reference to it as Ur of the Chaldees would be similar to saying that if we say that Moses was leaving Ur of the Chaldees, it would be like saying a Native American hero of 1,000 years ago left Las Vegas on his way to Reno. And it makes exactly that much sense. So we know for a fact that that had to have been a reference that was written 1,000 years after it was alleged. There's another reference, it's Genesis 15:18, in which we have a contradiction in God's promise to the Israelites. If you read Genesis, I honestly must say I find it comical. Somebody isn't secure in their right to the promised land, because Genesis, Abraham will walk a little ways, and then God will promise him that he and his descendants will have the land of Canaan for themselves. And then he goes with his wife to another city, and then God promises him that he and his descendants will have the land of Canaan to themselves. So there's this constant reiteration of the promise. One of the promises is different. One of the promises doesn't just promise Canaan. It actually promises the land from what's called the River of Egypt, which is not the Nile, but a river in the east of the Sinai, all the way to the Euphrates. That's not just Canaan. That's a whole bunch of stuff. That's a whole bunch of land. Well, interestingly, during the kingdom of David, the land of the Israelites had extended by force of arms. They had extended their land up to the Euphrates and down to this river. And so it's believed that that was a historical interpolation that was placed into the Old Testament in order to justify this military action. Well, it's okay for us to be here because God promised it to us. They actually didn't go back and change every one of the promises. They just changed one of them. So this is just an example in the Old Testament of the fact that scriptures are changed, they're interpolated, they're written in different times, they're attributed to historical figures that could not have written them for several reasons. This idea of sort of the slipperiness of the texts transfers itself right up to the New Testament as well.
How did you become interested in this topic?
This is the kind of issue that has always interested me in religion, and I've thought about why this is. I am interested in the diversity of religious views, more so than a lot of other people, I think. It always struck me that religious belief, religious faith is presented as a duality. You have two choices. It's an either-or. You believe in God, Jesus, the whole thing, or you don't believe. And I had a problem with that from the beginning because starting around the age of 8, I became fascinated with the Greek and Roman pantheon. I knew more about the Greek and Roman gods than I did about Jesus. And and also the Norse pantheon. I was also interested in that, not quite in the same detail. And I knew it was silliness, right? Nobody believes in these pantheons anymore. And then it was really a little later, around the age of 11, that I first started to go to Sunday school and started to learn about the Christian religion. Okay, and now, it's not Zeus and it's not Jupiter and it's not Thor. It's Jehovah, Jesus raising from the dead, not Zeus raising from the dead. All these substitutions. And this we know for sure. And I thought, okay, so we're really secure on this, but this over here, this is all nonsense. And I began to realize that it's not an either-or proposition. As soon as you say you believe in the Christian God, you're also saying, not only do I not believe there's no God, but I also don't believe in Zeus, and I don't believe in Vishnu, and I don't believe in Thor. You're negating these other systems as well. And so every statement of faith is actually a multiple rejection as well as a single acceptance. It's not just an either-or. So when we get into the question of alternative scriptures, we get into exactly the same question. Why? It's not just a question of accepting the Bible or rejecting the Bible. We have accepted this particular canon of books, and in the historical process, there were a large number of scriptures that were rejected for one reason or another. I want to know why. I'm interested in knowing why. And the more you dig into it, the more you find exactly the same reasons that the Old Testament scriptures are the way they are. There were political and historical reasons that led to decision-making primarily over the course of the first 400 or 500 years of the church.
Okay. Well, let's dig into it. Let's take a look at some of these alternative scriptures and gospels. Set the scene for us. What was life like back then?
Okay. First century and second century in the church, one of the misconceptions that runs through Christian history, I should just say one of the themes, one of the threads, is that, gosh, we've got to get back to the original church. We've got to get back to that unity again. Remember back in the old days when everybody believed the same thing, we had the same set of scriptures, we had the same understanding of Christ. That was never the case. It was never the case for a moment that the church was unified. The Christian church during the first century and halfway into the second century was more disunified than it is now. I mean, we think now that we've got a lot of doctrinal differences. A whole lot was taken care of later on compared to the differences that existed in that first century. There were three main divisions in the Christian church now. There were Jewish Christians, which sounds like a contradiction to us, but they were basically naturalistic Christians. They believed that Jesus had been a man and a good teacher. There are the Pauline Christians, those who followed the letters of Paul, written in the generation just after the crucifixion. And then the Gnostic Christians, my favorite, because they just have a wacky view of the Christian story. And I say that because I'm accustomed to what I must say is another wacky view of the Christian story. The Pauline Christians are the ones who end up triumphing for historical reasons. And their story is no less strange than the Gnostic story, but it's the one I'm accustomed to. It's the one I'm born into, and so it's a little more understandable. So what happened is we had a tremendous diversity around the Mediterranean of Christian belief. It had spread fairly far, but there were a large number of different teachers, different important teachers, different central scriptures and writings, different traditions, different liturgies, a tremendous amount of variety. And eventually this became a problem. And by the time we get, just to skip ahead a little bit, by the time we get up to the year 325, we start to have more of a political need for unity, because for various reasons having to do with the Romans and with other influences from the outside, Christians need to figure out who they are. And so the Council of Nicaea is called, and this is bishops from 318 bishops out of a much larger number who are called from all around the Mediterranean.
Called by Constantine?
Called by Constantine, yes.
Emperor Constantine of Rome.
Exactly, right. Who, despite appearances, was not a Christian at this point. Mm-hmm. He is one who is saying, you've got to get your act together. We've got to know what Christianity is about, because we want to control the more dangerous aspects of Christianity. He did convert to Christianity, but it was not, supposedly, at the time that he called the council. So these 318 bishops came together, and among other things, they were going to select canonical texts for the New Testament. So we already had an understanding of what the Jewish sacred scriptures were. And then we also have to figure out Jesus. What was Jesus? And there were two main threads, two main schools of thought. Athanasius was a bishop who was of the feeling that Jesus must be divine, otherwise he couldn't be our Savior, which is fabulous circular logic. Then there was Arius, who proposed that Jesus and God were very separate and different. Jesus was very close to God, but he was not divine. He was just a good teacher. That eventually became called the Arian heresy, and Athanasius wins the day. But it was at this council that we took all the available Gospels. There were between 40 and 80 are the estimates, various Gospels that describe the life of Jesus, and we have to decide which ones are really going to be in the canon and which ones are heresies. So I want to present some of those and give you a flavor for that.
Okay. Well, what do you have first up?
First one I'm going to read from is called the Secret Book of John. This is something in which the Gnostics are actually, now it's a New Testament book. It takes place in New Testament times, but they are describing the origin of the world. So in the New Testament, they are having one of the New Testament characters go to a Pharisee and ask to have the original creation story clarified. So here's the way it goes. This is entitled, Of Sophia, Mother of the Monstrous Creator Yahweh. It happened one day when John, the brother of James, went up to the temple, and there a Pharisee named Aramanius approached him and said to him, "Where is your master whom you followed?" He said to him, "He has returned to the place from which he came." And the Pharisee said to him, "This Nazarene deceived you with deception and hardened your hearts and estranged you from the tradition of your fathers." We're talking about the Nazarene here. "When I, John, heard this, I went away from the temple to the mountain, to a desert place, and with great grief in my heart I said, 'How then was the Savior appointed? And why was he sent into the world by his Father who sent him? And who is his father? And what is the nature of the heaven to which we shall go? As I had these thoughts, the heavens opened, and the whole creation shone with a light not of earth, and the universe was shaken. I was afraid and fell down, and behold, a child appeared to me. But I saw the form of an old man in whom was light, and so on. So this child figure ends up revealing to him the way in which the universe was created. It's a very, very different scenario. But this is, again, in the New Testament, Christians describing a story that is entirely different from what eventually became part of the canon. I want to read to you another scripture that goes into detail on that creation story. This is called On the Origin of the World. This is a Gnostic scripture as well. This section is entitled, The Rape of Eve by God and His Angels. Then the authorities, those are the angels, were informed that Adam was alive. Now what happened here is that, I have to go back a little bit, Sophia was the mother of God, and at the same time she was Eve. So she's a figure that's on both sides of the equation. She was created first, and then she breathed life into Adam. This is a fabulous feminist text here. When God and his angels realized that she had breathed life into the creature that they had created, they hadn't intended to breathe life into him yet. Now it's going to be all sorts of trouble. Then they sent 7 angels to see what had happened. And the angels said, let us seize her and let us cast our seed on her so that she will be polluted and will not be able to ascend to her light. So God and the angels in this story actually rape Eve. But let us not tell Adam that she is not derived from us, but let us bring a stupor upon him, teach him in his sleep that she came from his rib, so that the woman will serve and he will rule over her. So this is the idea is that God is deceiving Adam, and Eve then deceives God. She laughed at his false intention. She darkened God's eyes and left her likeness beside Adam. She actually created a likeness of herself and put it beside Adam. And then Adam puts his seed in the likeness, and the likeness gives birth and so on, but Eve is freed from this relationship. So it's just an entirely different way of looking at the Adam and Eve story, an entirely different relationship between Adam and Eve, and something that I think would have taken a lot of the misogyny out of early Christianity if Eve had been that powerful. Let's see what else I have for you here. There are a number of things that are specifically called Gospels. We have the Gospel of Truth. In the Gospel of Truth, the sins of the world, our error, this is pretty different. This is also Gnostic. Our spirit trapped in ignorance, darkness, and matter are caused by God. Our sin is caused by God, the God of the Jews and the Christian. But salvation remains possible in each person. Through illumination and knowledge, or gnosis, salvation may come to an individual soul, and each cosmic event of self-knowledge affects the whole universe, helping to bring grace to the world and to reduce the damage done by God. Now this is an entirely different way of looking at things. Their belief was that Yahweh was not the ultimate God. He was actually a lower God, a lesser God, and they called him a jealous God from the Hebrew terminology. And that the Father of light was a greater God who did not create the world. Yahweh, who was a trickster God, created the world and thereby created sin, because he was not supposed to do that creation. We were the victims of this act of sinful creation. And he's sometimes called the demiurge. The demiurge as creator acts as Sophia's agent. He is an ignorant creator deprived of gnosis for his own salvation. But man and woman, through knowledge of their own spiritual life, may ultimately heal and redeem their creator. Now that's a different way of looking at things.
Redeem the Creator.
Redeem the Creator. Now, for some reason, they rejected this.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these, you can see why it wouldn't have fit into their conception of what they were looking for the text. Others are not that far afield. It's a different telling of the story, but they're just not that far afield. The entire Gnostic heresy was something that they rejected. They rounded up as many of the texts as they possibly could after the Council of Nicaea had chosen the Gospels that remained, and they burned them, and they started to institute punishments for anybody who was spreading the teachings of Gnosticism.
Yeah. So not only did the Christians burn the pagan texts, but they rejected Judeo-Christian texts.
Right.
They tried to stamp those out as well.
Right, exactly.
Anything that wasn't orthodox.
Anything that was not orthodox according to the vote of these bishops. Now, one of the things that I think is interesting that's brought up all the time is the idea that God guided the hand of the bishops in the selection, right? He caused them to choose the texts that were actually true. The question I have then is, why was the vote so close? The vote was really close. 318 voting, and it was close to 150, what would that be, 168 or something like that. Now, wouldn't you think he would go for a unanimous verdict instead of having that sort of a result? So that's a little odd as well. The other thing that's interesting is we even have different versions of the standard Gospels. There is a secret Gospel of Mark, which comes out in a letter by Clement, one of the early church fathers, in which he is talking about interpolations that were placed into Mark that had other miracles and other acts of Jesus that were not included in the gospel that came down to us. This was a gospel that was written by the Jewish Christians, the secret Gospel of Mark, and it was rejected as well.
Oh, see. What else do you have?
My final example here, and again, there are a good 40 examples, which is amazing. You know, we've got so many examples because they were destroyed systematically once the canon was set, is the infancy Gospel of Thomas. So this is one that's ascribed to an apostle, which is something that was done all the time around the time of the councils because they wanted to give it the authority of these older figures, just like they wanted Moses to be the author of the Pentateuch. They wanted the actual apostles to be the author of these Gospels, even though they couldn't possibly have been, given what's talked about in them. But one thing that always struck me that's missing from the life of Christ is most of the life of Christ, right? We don't have anything from the Nativity to the age of 12, when he's amazing the rabbis in the temple. And then there's a tremendous skip until he's about 30. So what was he like as a kid? You know, I think that would be something we want to know about. Well, sure enough, there are a number of Gospels written that depict events in the life of the childhood of Jesus. And I just want to read some of the things that happen in the infancy Gospel of Thomas that paint a picture of another trickster, Jesus as trickster, as someone who is misusing his divine powers in many ways. The book begins with the exciting narrative of Jesus at the age of 5, modeling 12 sparrows out of clay by a rushing stream. It is the Sabbath, which he gladly profanes before a certain Jew, it says, because he is intentionally not Jewish in this story. With that act of Jesus at the beginning of the tale, the line is drawn between Judaism and Christianity. The child claps his hands like a magician, and the clay becomes flesh. The sparrows fly off, chirping. When another child, the son of the scribe Annas, disturbs the water with a willow branch, Jesus curses the impious ignoramus, unquote, and withers him. Then another village child runs along and bangs into his shoulder. Angered, Jesus kills him on the spot. Only his father Joseph dares to reprimand him by pulling his ear very hard. At this, Jesus is angered and warns his stupid father to stop. So it's a tremendously impertinent and out of control Jesus. So we have really a wide range of texts here. Some of them that are, you know, really fantastic supernatural reimaginings of the creation story. Some that are very naturalistic, alternative stories of the life of Christ. And then some of them that are really a reimagining of Jesus in a way that you can see they would have wanted to pull back from in this canonization. So it's a fascinating collection.
Yeah. Now, in the year 325 at the council convened by Constantine, when they voted on what made it into the Bible, and then they tried to destroy everything else, and yet some of these survive. Do you know how they ended up surviving?
I know that a large number of the some Gnostic texts and some other texts survived at Nag Hammadi, and the Dead Sea Scrolls were found near there. So these were actually, in I think both of those cases, they were actually found in clay pots that had managed to survive in the desert environment. So it's really, in most cases, absolutely the luck of survival of artifacts that got them to us. Certainly not the intentional recopying of scribes through the medieval period. That's the way the canon got to us.
Okay. You talked about the secret book of John and the secret Gospel of Mark. So that's the John and the Mark that are in the Bible, but these are supposedly alternative.
Right, alternative versions of that canonical text.
Yeah.
So again, we have the question, was it God guiding their hand, or were there political considerations guiding their hand?
what do you have the infancy Gospel of Thomas. There's also a Gospel of Thomas where it's just a lot of sayings, right? Like,
Yes, actually, that's sometimes referred to as the fifth gospel.
Right.
A lot of scholars refer to it as the fifth gospel. It's 114 sayings of Jesus. And they actually are quite well convinced that Matthew and Luke, the writers of Matthew and Luke, had the Gospel of Thomas as one of their sources because so many of those sayings end up showing up in Matthew and Luke. So if it was worthy to be included in these canonical Gospels, why was it not included as a canonical Gospel?
Good question. Tell me a little bit more about that book.
Sure. This is a book that's available in the libraries, Hennepin County. I know this is from Hennepin County. It's called The Other Bible, and it's a tremendous work of scholarship that simply pulls together these non-canonical Jewish and Christian texts, and it's really just fascinating reading. It has some good scholarship and commentary along with it, as well as a lot of references to follow up. But it's just riveting reading because it's so close and yet so far to the canon that we've come to know.
Now, another interesting twist on this all is we have the Jesus Seminar, and that took the four Gospels, and they also looked at Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas, the sayings.
Right.
And they voted on what they thought Jesus actually did say and didn't say. So there's taking something that made the first cut, was passed by the bishops in 325, right. And now they're looking at it more closely and saying, well, Jesus couldn't have said this, or this exists in an earlier thing,
right.
or doesn't harmonize with other messages.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, this wonderful color coding system of red. The red letters would be something that he certainly said. Pink would be something he might have said. Gray, probably not, and black, definitely not. And they didn't have a single thing that came out in red in the existing Gospels.
Yeah, it's just amazing. Anything else you want to tell us about?
Well, I guess what I would just do is encourage everybody to take a look at these, because it's fascinating. I don't think knowledge about this sort of thing can ever be a bad thing. You should make decisions about everything in terms of all the information you can get your hands on, and not just take someone else's word for what is canonical. Look at these yourself and put yourself in the position of the Council of Nicaea and see what you think.
It's interesting that even with the batch of books that they did end up in the Bible, and as much as they tried to harmonize the message, you get a book like Ecclesiastes, which seems to indicate that there is no afterlife.
Right.
For example.
Phenomenal contradictions.
Yeah.
Right. Even with that supposedly careful and God-guided process. Right.
Yeah, a lot of contradictions. Okay, well, it looks like we're out of time again. Thanks for joining us, Dale.
Absolutely, glad to.
And thank you for joining us for Atheist Talk. If you'd like free literature or a speaker about atheism, or more information, a free sample newsletter, feel free to contact us. We also have a great website that's appeared throughout the show. And we hope you consider becoming a member of Minnesota Atheists, because remember, if you're interested in us, we're interested in you.